Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 15th installment of the Green Dragon podcast. I'm your host for tonight, Tom,
And I am your fellow host, Jake.
and Aiden isn't with us tonight because his apartment um, had some problems. His pipes froze while he was gone, and so we came back to a very moist apartment. Everything was rather wet, and they got the pipe sealed up, and then tonight, when he thought he could get on, they burst open again, so he's having a rough day of it, and so hopefully he'll be back on next week. But tonight we have a new guest. His name is Braden Licciardi, and I had the honor of going to school with him in college. And he is working on he just finished his thesis project, which is a long paper exploring a certain question or topic that most interests you. And he wrote his on hope. And this week we thought it'd be a great topic to introduce and start off the new year. Um, Kind of getting into what hope is, understanding how it's so important in our lives, what the implications of having hope and not having hope are. And so, yeah, we thought Braden would be the perfect guy to have on to talk about this topic. And yeah, I think we could dive right in. So, what do you think, Braden, is the first question we should ask when exploring hope?
Well, thanks for having me on. Um, I looked into your guys' podcast a little bit just before I hop in and kind of listen to some of your guys' content, and was really happy with what I saw and or listened to, I suppose. But um, yeah, right now I just I just finished my senior thesis project part one. I'll defend it next semester. But I wrote my thesis on man's proper response to suffering, which is kind of where hope came in. And so I kind of broke down what um, hope and suffering is, because they're two really related ideas. Especially today's day and age, you have um, a lot of suffering in the world, but you also have kind of like this weird idea of what people hope in. Like you don't see people actually like, I don't know, putting hope in God or like faith, but rather certain goods like material or immaterial, and like kind of have this Hobbesian view of life, maybe not as extreme as all out war, but you have this idea of kind of like satisfying a constant desire of whatever you want at a given point. Um, that's kind of what the Hobbesian idea is that constant satisfaction of whatever your desire is. Um, but yeah, so I talked about how we ought to hope, and as I was kind of talking about it before we started recording, I discussed more of kind of a theological, like it was a theological and philosophical approach to this idea of how man ought to respond to like his condition, that like we suffer. Um, and so I kind of broke it down as talking about this idea of hope and how man should begin that process of responding to a given uh, instance of suffering. Um, yeah, because I think, I don't know, like you have kind of what a you have a different approach to hope from whether it's a secular. I don't even know if you would consider um I don't know, the secular world as hoping in anything in particular. Again, it's probably kind of like a utilitarian idea, um rather than like Christian had, like the Christianity or any kind of religion has kind of a higher aim rather than simply immaterial or material um, goods. And I talked about how the Christian man and the secular man, they don't endure suffering in any different way. Like, you still lose a loved one, you still, I don't know, think of any kind of thing that causes one to suffer. That doesn't differ between kind of like your secular man or versus one that is steeped in a religion. However, they hope in different things, and they put their end mainly in two different ideas. One seems more fleeting, and the other seems kind of long lasting. But it's a long-winded way of saying that's kind of what I wrote my thesis on. Yeah, just kind of like speaking on the human condition and how you should respond to that condition.
It's such an interesting topic because I think it's that maybe silent or like hidden idea that we all have and that we're trying to hope in something. And how you were saying, like, the secular man doesn't hope in anything particular, but the Christian man does. But there's always like some sort of longing for something external to help fix a situation.
Yeah.
I think.
I guess I wouldn't say that the secular man doesn't hope in anything. I think they have two different ways of, they have two completely different interpretations of what you should hope in. You kind of have like this kind of like a eternal aspect that Christian man kind of like sees, like, I'm gonna just say Christian and forego saying religion. But you have kind of like that eternal aspect that they're searching for, versus the secular man still pursues something, but in a different capacity than what the Christian man sees. They put their ends in two different goods. And that's what, like, I would say that the secular man actually does hope. And they kind of hope in like a natural way through a material or immaterial goods, while the Christian man takes that a step further and kind of steps into a supernatural type of hope. I think all men kind of like start with that basis of like, you hope in material or immaterial goods.
Yeah, I remember the recently departed Benedict XVI touched upon that in his encyclical on hope when he wrote concerning men and what they place their hope in, that generally in a material sense it's hoping to land a fulfilling position or a long-standing relationship, something material, but that when even when it's attained, you still find yourself hoping for something more, something transcendent, and that's, I think, where the two kind of meet, the supernatural and the material.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, it's just, the reason why this, like, that topic kind of interested me, it's mainly from the get-go, was just I'd heard so many people just kind of like, or so many Christians kind of respond in that, I don't know, not necessarily lukewarm, but kind of like robotic response of like, oh, you should just like either offer up your sufferings, or you need to hope in this and pray for that, like, without actually understanding or taking into consideration what that actually entailed. And what I found was that, I don't know, that just looking at man's in, I don't know. I definitely want to get more practical here at some point, but just looking at a man's condition of his fallen nature, I really harped on the idea that we didn't lose we didn't lose our final end. We didn't lose that final objective. We lost the ability to achieve that. And it's like once we fell, like we no longer had the ability to achieve like this relationship with Christ or with Christ and God. So we didn't lose that kind of like desire in our soul. What we lost was the ability to achieve that in kind of like in the pre-fallen state, where we could kind of talk or how we were able to choose to continually fulfill our end, which was kind of like having that relation. Thomas Aquinas speaks about it as having this your passions and reason completely ordered and subordinate to Christ. And then like obviously like when we fell, that was disrupted. And that disruption created this thing called pain and suffering that we now have to endure. But what it also created was this idea of hope, and kind of a longing for that final end, but we just couldn't grasp it any longer. And obviously, like that's a lot of intellectual sandboxing, but I think that idea still holds true that pre-fallen state, if you're Aristotelian, I don't know, it seems like you would agree with the idea that Aquinas or that man would be able to continually choose his final end because his reason and passions were subject to God.
Yeah, that's making me really think here, Braden, because hope is something I've been thinking about for a long time, especially when there's like a big something that's really painful or a pretty great suffering comes into your life, and sometimes like the head knowledge that everything will be okay sometimes doesn't do it for you or for anyone. And I've been listening to a bit of Jordan Peterson, and he talks a lot about how suffering is what kind of channels whether or not you respond well or poorly to something. He said that in the, I guess you call the field of psychology, psychiatrists have found out that people don't unlearn a fear, they just become braver than the thing they fear. So it's like the more you face the things that you're afraid of, the bigger you are, so to say, and you're able to overcome those fears. And he was saying that in Exodus, he said it was so interesting when God told them to put the serpent on the tree, and whoever looked at the serpent would not be harmed by all the snakes anymore. And he thought it was really interesting that in the New Testament, Christ said, I will be raised up like the serpent in the time of Moses. And that was really interesting to him. He was like, what is going on here? And then he started to realize that since Christ was the one who took on all the pain and suffering that we experience as humans, by looking at him, we're looking at the thing we fear most, or we fear the most that will happen to us, like death or extreme pain. But seeing that someone already dealt with it and overcame it, he gives us hope that we can as well. And that really kind of cemented into my mind a practical way of looking at suffering. thinking about it as an opportunity to get closer to Christ as a Christian. But then even like from if I didn't have like a Christian understanding of who God is and what our role in reality involves in coming towards Him, just realizing that the more you're able to stand and face what you fear, the stronger you'll become and the more you'll be able to handle it. So, I don't know if you have some pointers on like understanding, like, is that kind of understanding helpful for a person, or do you think like we need to go deeper? I know I kind of, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that that idea is helpful. And it's even like, and you can take that kind of, I don't know, by facing your fears, you can kind of translate that into, I don't know, building habits or discipline. Like, I don't know, especially relating it to kind of like the new year, and especially for Americans, like there seems something connected with that idea of hope in, like that facing your fears is connected with like habits. And it's like, how are you going to actually like face your fears? It's going to be through habitual discipline and like disciplined habits. And especially with like the new year, like considering, I don't know, like actually being a man, or like sticking to your word of, I'm going to start going to the gym. Like that's like the classic example, and you see memes about it all the time. And I don't know, all the gym gurus get annoyed at about a week or two before and after New Year's, because you have a bunch of people coming in kind of doinking around on the equipment and then just leaving. And I don't know, that's all to say that, I don't know, facing your fears requires kind of habit or discipline. Um, I think, and obviously the Exodus is a little bit more of a supernatural mic drop moment for God, but um, I don't know, that facing your fears idea, I think, is really important in terms of actually dealing with suffering. Um, which like you just kind of have to acknowledge that like you're going to have hardships in your life, and they're going to be painful. And it's like, are you going to be like, are you going to have the ability to overcome those struggles? Yeah, I don't know. I think that's a key part of being able to hope.
Yeah, I agree, Braden, that it definitely begins with your habits, especially even small things like you referenced going to the gym, something that might not seem at the time when you're younger like it's not life or death, but um yeah, if you build up your habits in the small matters, I think you're more adequately prepared for when some major suffering or crisis occurs in your life. Um, you'll be more equipped to deal with it in a hopeful manner.
Yeah, and I think it's, yeah, and that's just, it's so important because you have, I don't know, it doesn't even need to be this grandiose idea of like building habits. Like actually holding yourself to waking up at a specific time and not letting yourself slack off from that. That's huge. Like you've done the first part of the day. There was that Navy SEAL, I believe, talked about getting up and making your bed every day. And it's like, if the whole world is completely like awful and completely just not your day, you can come back to that one accomplishment. Like, at least I like made my bed. And that just gives you a sense of accomplishment, because I don't know. I feel like especially as young people, like we have a want of being accomplished, but especially because of modernity and how like we're able to live our lives now, we're pretty lazy with being accomplished. Like we don't want to make our bed. We want to be able to hit the snooze button 2 times before we actually get up. I'll go to the gym in 10 minutes. I need to sleep because I didn't get my 8.5 hours. Like, I don't know. It's habituating yourself to a lazy and easy life rather than preparing yourself for, I don't know, life and those struggles that you'll have.
Yeah, it's so countercultural to a society that does promote that lazy life that you mentioned. It makes it all the more difficult, but also all the more important to be building those habits.
Yeah. It's key. I don't know. Like it really doesn't require that much effort to go on a walk. Like you can forget going out to the gym, like starting your day off with 5 push-ups. Like it may seem weak, like it's not, like some people might think that's kind of oh well, that's not that much. It's like, well, before you can get to those, like going to the gym on a constant daily routine, you have to be disciplined enough to do 5 push-ups. And a lot of young people out there aren't willing to do that. A lot of people aren't willing to do that.
You know, it's interesting. Um, in the beginning, you talked about the Hobbesian mindset that they're focusing on instant gratification. Um, how does hope play into that? Like, how do you restructure your mind to think more in a long-term perspective and forego that instant gratification of the snooze button or taking little extra times here and there to be lazy or procrastinate when you know you should be upping your game? Do you have some ideas on how that would work into that housing idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely Hobbesian-esque. Maybe not to the, like I said, not to the point where we're quite literally at war with one another, but we do have that want to fulfill whatever we're desiring at any given moment. Um, like that seems like a very cultural thing now. Like, I don't know, pick any in like pick any young person out there. Like, I don't know, it's difficult to build. It's difficult to build good habits when you're kind of fulfilling that every whim. Like you have to be able to tell yourself no, or you have to be able to do without certain things. And I think just that, even the snooze button in the morning, like that's fulfilling my whatever desire at any given point. Like, no, I'm going to sleep a little longer. No, I'm going to make it as easy as humanly possible to achieve whatever I need to achieve, but I'm going to do it in the most lazier, I don't know, lazy way, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem, or it does seem that um, we have that kind of culture embedded with us. And I think the connection with that to hope is that I talk about 2 different ways that man hopes naturally. And that's in the material and immaterial goods. This kind of falls under that, the idea of the material goods. Like, I don't know, take any kind of instance. like wanting to sleep in, like it's putting your end in some kind of material thing. And if you're not habituating that to something higher, like you kind of get into that mindset of fulfilling your want at a particular whatever kind of giving time.
Yeah, I've it just came to my mind when you're talking. It seems like instant gratification is like a person sees that they want a desire filled and they want to take it. They're like, I'm feeling hungry, so I'm going to take food right now. Or I'm feeling tired, so I want to sleep right now. But in those instant gratification, moments of instant gratification, those people are foregoing the long-term perspective, and so their long-term is suffering because wherever their attention is placed, an outcome will result. So if you're placing your attention on things that will help you in the long term, when those later moments come, you'll be ready to have a better life instead of taking the easy path and then later you don't have something that you need or could want or have. And so it sets you up for failure because you're focusing on whatever is inside of you that wants to be satisfied now over what you know should be satisfied in the long term. And you can only have a sustainable life if you think in the long term, because then you'll have the resources later to keep living.
Yeah, I think that's true because you're just focused on like smaller things rather than kind of like large scale. It's like, yeah, you're going to focus on those smaller things, but when a large thing comes along and you're not ready for it, like a large situation that's, I don't know, catches you off guard, you're not going to know how to deal with it. Whereas if you're actually preparing yourself and doing the hard thing, be able to actually encounter that moment and not be overcome by some kind of like, despair or complete indifference to whatever's happening. You can actually like know that, or like hoping something better. No, I can endure this thing. Whereas the person who's only focusing on the little aspects of his life is going to be uh, not in the greatest situation when that like problem comes along.
Yeah, I wonder, Braden, you mentioned despair, and I remember you telling me a lot about that idea. I think with Kierkegaard. Um, just when I've talked to you about it in person, could you go into like what despair is and how hope plays into that feeling and pattern of, I guess, human behavior?
Yeah, so I I really think that kind of hope, despair, anger, all these kind of different emotions are different ways we respond to suffering. Um, you can respond to suffering in, oh, that's not that bad. I'm going to look ahead to the next um, thing, or you can be completely angry with whatever's going on, or you could just be completely rejected and kind of enter into this uh, emotion of despair, which is just kind of rejecting kind of respond like it's kind of an all-out rejection of that difficult thing. So because everything else kind of looks to restore um, the good that was lost. So if you're enduring some kind of suffering, right? Your initial reaction is going to be one of these emotions, but your overall objective is going to be restore whatever was lost or to stop feeling whatever you're feeling, right? And so I guess when I think of despair, it's kind of just a rejection to even respond to that pain, and it's kind of you're letting that situation or that pain overcome you and who you are, rather than you overcoming it with hope. And that's not to say that those are the only kind of emotions you can have when dealing with suffering. But I think the overarching thing you have to keep in mind is that you can't let those emotions control you. You have to be able to push through and have that kind of discipline and be habituated to dealing with difficult things so you can actually overcome those hard situations. But yeah, kind of despair is the opposite of what I would think hope is. Just kind of a rejection of responding to, kind of like an indifference, kind of like a woe is me, I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough. And that comes with kind of like weak-willedness, or weak-willed people, I suppose.
That's really interesting. That makes a lot of sense, because like when something happens and it feels like you can't make a change, it's so easy just to fall back into that mentality that there's nothing really I can do to make this better, so why even try?
Because it's hard trying. Like I don't want to be in any more pain. It's hard trying, so I'm going to just like be indifferent. You kind of pull the Raskolnikov card. To just be indifferent to all these things that are going on.
Yeah, because almost sometimes, like, this would be the Christian idea of like picking up your cross. It may hurt more to try to fix it now, but there's hope that it'll get better. So your future self would thank you if you did take it up now, but if you don't, then your future self might be crushed by it later.
Yeah, and I don't know. You could even say that like, and I guess the Christian view of hope is kind of getting at more of an internal aspect. It's kind of like perfected hope, right? Like as Christians, like you're going to uh, place your trust in a divinity, and um, and as Christians, like we're placing our hope in God for kind of a restoration of like our fallen human nature. But like I don't know, kind of like the secular person, like kind of still can build in those virtues of material, or kind of build on his natural inclination to hope. Like they can still practice these habits and disciplines to kind of prepare themselves to deal with larger things in life. But at a certain point, you're going to come up against something that is going to make you question, like, why am I even doing this? Like, this is too much. This is too hard. And it is, if you don't have Christ on your side. So I think it is important to not completely do away with the idea that, not to say that you were, but to build habits and discipline, and not necessarily, that doesn't mean that the secular man can't build those habits and disciplines, rather that the Christian view of hope is a supernatural one and will actually restore that falling condition, if we're willing. But that natural hope helps out a lot too.
For sure. What do you think about that, Jake? How the natural and the supernatural habits combine and build a hope?
Well, I think that yeah, I mean it's difficult. Really, without the supernatural, you can't. It's hard to maintain the natural without that, because you always end up with only natural hope. There will always be something more that you're looking for. You can't be fully satisfied. So I think yeah, it is absolutely necessary to have that supernatural aspect to it. But yeah, at the same time, the natural hope is also important. Sorry, I'm still trying to kind of wrap my head around it, but I mean, when you were talking about despair and how to counteract it, it reminded me of what Jordan Peterson talked about for his antidote to any negative feelings of like this is too hard or this is above me. And this is one of his more controversial statements, but he says, like, assume that it's your fault or that you could have done something differently to have reversed the situation or to have prevented it, even if it's objectively not your fault and something that was out of your control. Um, because he says if you have that mentality, then there's always like that opens the door, I think, for that natural hope, is that like there is something you can do about it, um, rather than if you think it's out of your control, you can't do anything, then you might as well give up. You can't really, you can't. There's no pathway forward from there.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I definitely don't disagree completely with that idea. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he's definitely on to something in terms of making something personal. Like, you make something personal and saying you could have done better. Yeah, you could. There's kind of that um, danger of actually making it like kind of being overcome by that idea. But when you make it personal and you make it say you could do it a better way, that kind of motivates you and gives you kind of a mindset of overcoming something. And I think that's what really builds the ability, like kind of what you were saying. Like natural hope can only get you so far, because we have a natural disfigurement from the get-go. Like, sure, we can overcome some things, but at a certain point, there's nowhere else to go except God. And kind of, I don't know, that mindset of making it personal kind of, I don't know, just strikes me as really attempting to overcome those struggles or that suffering, in the best, I guess, in the best way is by just kind of motivating yourself to overcome something. But again, like, it only goes so far without Christ.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of like, well, out here in Wyoming right now, Baden, we got 2 feet of snow here over today and yesterday. So there's a lot to come back to. But yesterday I helped my brother Ben. He helped pull out a semi, and then cumulatively we did 9 people that we got help get unstuck. And I was just thinking this was like the perfect analogy. It's like it's probably a bad decision when you were driving where you were driving. You got stuck. But then you're like, well, it was my fault, so I'm going to get out and do what I can. So like you start shoveling and nudging and stuff. But it's really when the big boys come over with the big trucks that they can give you a nice doink and yank out of that situation. And that's kind of like what Christ has. He just has the jacked up truck that comes over when you're stuck and just says, I can give you a hand, hooks you up and let's go. Yeah, but if you didn't do anything, if you just sat there and were like, what was me? I shouldn't be in this car. There's too much snow. Then it's like, well, that's not helping you or anybody else. But by even just trying to get out and trying to move, someone else is going to see you and they're going to come over and give you a hand. So it's almost like maybe one of the best ways to get help when you're in a situation and it's a lot of suffering is trying your best to get out of it. And people will notice, and especially God will notice, because if you're trying, then He is going to come help you because of who He is.
It's kind of building, yeah. Not only do you have to build like those, I don't know, build those habits, but also at a certain point you have to build the habit of letting go and letting God, as the saying goes. Like ultimately you have to be willing for God to restore your nature. You have like that defect that doesn't let us achieve our final end anymore. But we have this we have this aspect of hope that if we're able to build and cultivate it, we can get to a point where our disposition is towards God and not towards those little comforts in life, not towards the snooze button, not towards watching football on Sundays, which I'm very prone to, but towards kind of like your ultimate end, which is ultimately what we're all seeking. And some place that end in lower things. Just the other day, I saw this poor family in Texas gas station, and it killed me because it was like the stereotypical kind of American, like kind of obese and the kids complaining and mom and parents not doing anything. It was just like this awful side of just, you've never met with any adversity or you've rejected to even encounter any. It wasn't much like, it wasn't accusatory. It was just kind of a sad moment of like, like if you could only like, I don't know, suffer through some little things and actually seek to overcome it rather than shoving a piece of candy in a kid's mouth or throwing an iPad at them. I don't know. It's just a very difficult thing to see sometimes.
Yeah, it is so easy to fall back into those habits. Again, it comes back to what Tom and you, Braden, mentioned about the instant gratification and how that's really, I think, promoted, especially, I would say, through social media, TikTok in particular, or Instagram now, where they come out with these reels where, if you don't like what you're seeing, you just scroll on to the next one until you find something that satisfies that urge.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's a lot more of a challenge, I think, maybe than it was in the past in today's society. But
Yeah,
yeah, again,
that's why.
makes sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, that's what I was just gonna say. You see, like all these solid old cowboys in their 80s and 90s, or just like these really um, awesome elderly people. But then you look at the kids around, and like they've been able to scroll for 3 hours, picking out the two videos they wanted to watch. Like, just that mentality is building a weak-willed person. Like, you're not
Right.
able to go like invest your time into something that's like actually satisfying. Like, you're kind of, I don't know, submitting yourself to 3 hours of drooling and then approximately 10 minutes of entertainment while you could be doing something more, I don't know, sounds utilitarian, but productive. But that's hard um, to actually build some sort of habit within yourself. But sorry, totally cut you off.
No, no, you're good. You finished my thought perfectly. That was exactly what I was thinking. But yeah. Um yeah, it's funny. We I always think about what great stories the old cowboys and elderly people that you mentioned have to tell. And a lot of that, it just comes from them being more active than the younger generation now. They were going out and doing things and uh yeah, making memories, finding meaning. And I think that's another reason um that there's so much despair among the younger generations now, is that there is a lack of meaning, um which stems from an overall lack of activity.
Yeah, because it creates your dependency on things on the lowest form of intellectual activity. Like, there's so much, like, I don't know, like depression over social media. I'm like, your life doesn't, you can turn off social media and nothing would change in the way you saw people. Like, there would be no after effect if you disengage from social media. Um, Heck, if anything, there would be a change, and it would be you'd have 5 hour extra hours in the day, um, rather than just drooling at a screen. And I think that's why there's like that's a big reason why there's so much despair these days, is because no one's willing to go do the arduous thing. Um, it's more like, I'm going to stay in my comfort bubble and not do anything that's difficult. Tom lives in Wyoming, where he has to shovel 3 feet of snow out of his driveway now. Like, sure, it's a mundane and task, but it's difficult, and I don't know. Like, at least it gives you a sense of accomplishment rather than scrolling for 3.5 hours.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like the thought train you guys are on, because um, I was with my nephews and my family for Christmas, and um, they got some pretty cool toys, and one of them was like this marble tower where you have like build the structure. You drop marbles, you can like make them go in different ways. It might go through like spinning wheels and like little slides and stuff. And it's really exciting because you can make patterns of physics, and then the kids learn how physics work by just watching, observing, but they're building the experience for themselves. And I think thinking about like the idea of like what is work has been on my mind a lot recently. And the idea of work is to produce something in order to make your life better. And all economy is people building something that they think will be helpful and asking someone else if they could trade it for something the other person built to make their lives better. And the more this happens, the more economy is built and wealth is created. And so, really, a person's life is limited to what they can think of and build in a very real sense. Because, like, as example, like, we're able to talk across the country simultaneously about some really interesting ideas, but it was the person who figured out how radio waves worked, how electricity worked, put it into an LCD screen, all these different elements, but all people were like, I see a problem and I want to fix it. Like Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone because he was trying to figure out how to make hearing aids for his wife. And that was his mission, was to get her to hear again. But it was like they see a need and they want to fix it or make a solution for that need. And so like with the Instagram and like the TikTok and the social media, there's no real need there. Like the kids aren't exposed to a need that they can go fix, or if there is a need, they're so distant from it that by the time they try to work towards fixing that problem, they're too late or it's beyond their reach. So you feel helpless by observing these people that really need help or people that are having a good life. Then you feel removed as well because you want to be a part of that, but you don't know that person, you can't go meet that person. If you try to talk to them on there, they'll think you're a scammer or whatever. So it's like you're watching a reality that's real. It's not TV that's made up, but you're watching things that are actually happening and you don't feel like you can participate in it. But it's like if you take in your domestic world and start using your mind creatively towards making a better future for others, and a lot of those things that will make that future better are the arduous tasks, like the hard things. It's putting yourself under strain so that you can build back healthier and stronger so that you can do even something more difficult which can do more good. So it's this continuous cycle of improvement and growth in order to have a better life. But that can only come from, like what Jake was saying, by accepting some sort of self-responsibility, saying I can make a change.
Yeah. And with that, just, yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I don't know, being able to make that change, not only in kind of like your daily life, all this would be included in the daily life, I suppose, but just not only focusing on kind of that natural aspect, but that's as well as a supernatural aspect. Like there's an amazing, we in theology over the last semester, we talked about this idea that Christ like only wants 30 seconds. Like if you could love him for 30 seconds, that would be enough. Like just 30 seconds a day of just like pure love. And that's like you're still struggling. Like obviously you're going to deal with like random vices or like sins, but like 30 seconds. 30 seconds. That's crazy.
That is wild.
That is a sneeze. Right? But it's so difficult. Like you look around and like you seem like you, it makes the whole like, oh, I don't have time to pray look like a complete joke. It's like really like forget an hour, 30 seconds of just willingness to, I don't know, Christ. Like if that's the starting point you need, like I know that's what I need. Like then you have to build on it. And like that makes it like again kind of relates to those little habits. Like I'm not gonna hit the snooze button. Like how hard is that? in the grand scheme of things, it seems a heck of a lot easier than going to the gym every day. I'm going to do 5 push-ups. Maybe it sounds like kind of petty, but it's going to be way easier than, I don't know, running 5 miles every day. So that key is like, you're at a point where you need discipline and good habits, then you need to start off at that level. And there's nothing wrong with that. Just being honest. Like, if anything, that's an amazing ability to be able to be real with yourself and with others. And like, no, I need to be able to be disciplined enough to do 5 push-ups in the morning, and disciplined enough to pray for 30 seconds a day.
Yeah, it's like it's building the foundation. So like those little habits are like what's that place where you can build your self-confidence. So you can say, I kept that promise to myself, and I can keep this bigger promise, and I can keep that other big promise. And that's like what builds it's like the structure of your life. I don't know if you
And
guys, what's that?
you've made it personal.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys have heard about this book. I read it last year. It was really good. It's called Atomic Habits. But it's by a guy named James Clear, and he was a baseball player. He got a really bad injury, and after that, he really decided to put his efforts on just building small habits that would really help him in the future. And he made this book, and it breaks down like the actual psychology behind a habit. It's like cue, so something catches your attention that starts your craving, and then you seek for some end to fix it, and then you're satisfied. So that's like the 4-step process of like how every habit is built. But he was saying that essentially habit building is really easy if you have a goal in mind, and then you can identify the bad habit. So he said usually all bad habits is trying to find some way to calm the pain now, but you're going to a default setting. So like one example I've had a lot is like, if I don't feel secure with somebody's company, I'll kind of like back away and let other people fill in the conversation instead of like being proactive and thinking on my own and coming up with a good topic to talk about. But it's an easy thing to do, just hide, but that's not really productive towards making a relationship with somebody. So he would give an example of like, well, if that's your problem, then instead of like being scared or like insecure, what you can do is like take 2 breaths, and that you're like, okay, I'm in control. I can do something to make this better. So it's like a little change of like the cue. It's like instead of being scared, switches to confidence, and then you'll have a new habit building there. I thought it was so simple and like so easy to put in place, but at the same time, our minds are set in a pattern where a lot of times we don't see those ways of improving, and then we keep falling back, and then we get discouraged again and like, why should I try again?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely takes effort, and that's something I was thinking about as you guys were talking. There is that like you're never remaining stagnant in your progress. You're either, and this goes for the spiritual life or natural habits, both ways. Um, you're either progressing or you're degenerating back into like old bad habits. So I think, yeah, it's always important to be cognizant of that, but you can't really let up, once you form a good habit. If you let that, if you break it, you could actually slip back into a worse habit than before you had formed a good one.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't know if you think about it, like think of your 5 like imperfection or vices that you have various throughout the day. Oh, I hit the snooze button. Oh, I procrastinate, especially when I do this activity or like this part of the job or whatever. If you focus, like, say you have 5, if you focus on one of those and literally root it out for a month, like focusing like very intensely on that one aspect of your life. Maybe it's a small one, hitting the snooze button, but like really focusing and rooting it just completely out. Like you're building a good habit. And the same goes for like the spiritual life. There was a saint that said, like, okay, if you have like 10 sins and you literally work on eradicating one every, like, for a year, like literally one of those 10 sins. Obviously, there's going to be other sins that pop up, but you're going to be sinless in 10 years. Like, that's crazy if you think about it like that. Now, obviously, it's like you're going to mess up a lot more than that. And once you start like bettering yourself and like these like certain areas of your life, there's going to be others that pop up that you didn't realize. But that's still that idea of those 10 like sins. Like you could be sinless in 10 years. You could be a well-disciplined individual in a year. Like it doesn't take, like, even if you spend a year on like those, maybe they're slightly bigger problems like procrastination, like you work on that for a year, like that's such an achievement and such a character building moment that is almost priceless, I think. But just being able to say no to that small little thing day in and day out, like, sure, you're not going to see like amazing results right away, but the point is you're habituating yourself to good, disciplined habits rather than kind of like this overarching, oh, I'm going to do these 10 different things to help make me a better person and forget about 90% of them in about a week and a half.
That's really interesting, Aiden. Braden, I haven't heard that before about like that focusing on like the one thing and then you just eradicate it and you can focus on the others. But that makes so much sense. It reminds me of a stat I heard that if you spend 18 minutes a day on any skill, in 1 year you'll be better than 95% of the world's population in that one activity. So like if you just practice the piano for 18 minutes a day, at the end of the year, you're better than 95% of the world in playing piano. Which is pretty incredible.
Grow that up.
What's that?
You just apply that to the kind of like spiritual aspect of your life. Like not necessarily like, oh yes, I must be better than others, but that idea that you can work on something for a long, like a year, to like better yourself. I don't know. I've been meaning to actually sit down and procrastinated on this, but sit down and make some New Year's resolutions. But it doesn't have to be this like massive comprehensive list.
No.
Like I'm going to stop. Like I'm never going to hit the snooze button again. Done. I'm done with it. And like maybe that's a small thing in like don't know, maybe focusing on 2 or 3 things, like maybe that's small, but you know what? After a year, I will have become that much better rather than giving myself these huge, crazy, lofty goals and then just failing at it.
Yeah, I mean it's powerful. Um, Reminds me of a story that James Clear shared in his book Atomic Habits. He said that the English biking team um, was the worst in the world. I don't think they had run a Tour de France in 95 years. They're terrible, like the worst of the worst. And they hired in a new manager, and he said that they would be going to the Tour de France in 5 years of winning. Turns out he was wrong. They went in 3 years, but his whole goal was 1% improvements on everything. So he called it the aggregation of marginal gains. But what he would do is like get new seats for the bikes that were more comfortable, more conducive to like powerful like biking, and then he would get new suits for the guys that were more breathable and more aerodynamic, and then he got new pillows for the team so they could sleep better, and then he painted the trailer of the bike trailer white so they could see all the dirt so they could clean their bikes better, and they just kept doing this, and then not only did they win it in 3 years, but they won it for 6 years in a row after that. So they went from the worst team to the best team ever. I think. I'm pretty sure that's like the world record now of like the best bicyclist. But he was just focusing on fixing little things. Like do this a little better, do that a little better. And it just stacks. It's like habit stacking. Like once you get the one down, then you can get the second. And then those two things are fixed. Now you can apply yourself to the third and fourth, etc. And it just keeps compounding. And it builds that momentum that can keep crushing those obstacles and enable you to be victorious at the end of the day. Like every day becomes a victory with lots of little victories inside of it, instead of like a defeat with a lot of like nicks and dings from all the things that have hurt you throughout the day. Like instead of hitting the snooze button, you're like, no, I'm bigger than that darn snooze button. I'm the warrior today. I'm going to take this thing down and go to the next level.
Yeah, and I think that's key. Like you have, I mean, people get worried about that being kind of like not enough or like not a big enough goal. And it's like, no, like that's how you are going to change is by stacking those habitual, like little habits together. So essentially, they're not going to become little at a certain point. At a certain point, they're going to be huge. But you can't go from like Nothingsville to being an amazing athlete. You can't go from being someone that has a hard time loving God to like a saint. Like you actually have to begin the process, and that process is really nitpicky, and it takes a while. But the cool thing is that it's small things. Like you focus on the small things, and you're able to actually get to a point where you've become something rather than kind of habituating yourself to these lofty goals, like instead of trying to reach these lofty goals just from the onset and just failing at them and going through this eternal cycle that all Americans these days go through of, I'm going to be the best at this and I'm going to learn how to do X, Y, and Z by the end of January, and see them barely getting out of bed still. Like it literally begins with the tiniest adjustments. Once you actually achieve those adjustments, then you're able to actually become a better person.
Yeah, I agree. I think that concept in and of itself of just small incremental habitual improvements, um, yeah, provides a great degree of hope to know that just by getting up doing something that you're perfectly capable of, even the smallest little improvement, that it can build up into you becoming proficient or even an expert at something that maybe you struggled with or thought you'd never really overcome.
Yeah, for sure. And um, one of the things about like, I think one of the really important things about like those small wins is that, excuse me, um, you can show yourself. It's like putting votes into yourself in your ballot box, saying, "No, you did a good job today at this thing." And when you see more and more of those things, you start to believe that you can make a change and you can make bigger changes, and then you can really start to go on the journey of fulfilling your big dreams and your big goals, because you have the habits in place to get all the little things done that will be entailed in accomplishing that big thing, that big goal. And you've already shown yourself that, yeah, I'm the kind of person that does show up and does play full out.
And then I think like your progress starts to accelerate and compound. As Braden said, that you work on one thing, you'll get better at multiple things at the same time. So all that, I mean, you get better at. You pick one virtue at the beginning of the year, as we mentioned. Um, I would say probably by the end of that year, maybe it's 4 or 5 that you're good at, and then from there on out, it just, like I said, it compounds. So it really, once you start the process, it only gets better from there on out as long as you stick with it. Just kind of a cool thought.
Yeah, and I think the real thing that we struggle with is not that because we've been so accustomed to this instant gratification, is that we can talk about this all day long and kind of have these great feelings about this idea. But when it comes down to it, even though there are little changes in your life, like you actually have to continually choose that. Like you have to actually put in the work, whatever little work there is to put in. It's not difficult to give 30 seconds to God or give up 3 extra minutes of sleep. It's not. The difficult thing is being consistent and not giving up after a week of not getting the sleep. It's like it might take forever, but that's going to be the difference of you continually working on that little aspect of your life is going to be the difference maker. But it's so hard for us to accomplish that now because we're so habituated to that initial that just immediate gratification of whatever we're desiring.
You know, that I heard this stat before, that if you try to improve 1/10% each day, that if you actually take that to the 365th power, so a full year of those tiny actions, it comes out to the number of 37. So you have the multiplier effect when you're just focusing on those little things each day that you can control, and it just makes yourself that much better. And it's really interesting because like the three things that you can usually control: your thoughts, your words, and your actions. And so when you take control of those areas, you're responsible for those parts of your life, then a lot of the other things will play out, because since God is always watching and caring, if you're taking responsibility for the things that He's asked you to take responsibility for, He will help you out in those other areas. And He's going to show you the way to expand your life the way He has envisioned for you. And yeah, it's just, it really is interesting how it's like one step is the way you make it to a hope-filled life.
Yeah, yeah, I think this is a really important thing to keep in mind just during the new year, and just realizing that it's achievable, it's small, and even though that it's achievable and small, it is difficult. And I think everybody has enough self-discipline to be able to accomplish at least one, if not 3 to 5 different little aspects of your life in the coming year. And just kind of keeping that mindset of slow progression, um, like that 37%, if you increase just like a tenth of your personhood, let alone like whether it's in your job, your business, your spiritual life, in your relationships, if you can work on that 0.1%, you're going to be a 37% of a better man, a better wife, a better, you name it. But it all begins with not only with talking about it, but actually doing it. And you have to take a real look at where you're struggling. Doesn't mean you have to like think for an hour about all the different vices you have. It's like, what in my life do I know I need to work on? And what's a small step to accomplishing that?
I agree. Yeah, it's much easier said than done. There will always be, no matter how, no matter how much your good habits benefit your life, there will always be urges to revert back into your old ways or old places. So yeah, that is definitely important to keep in mind, that, or just to always be aware of that effort will always need to be applied at any given time.
Yeah, it is really interesting. It's like just building that momentum does so much for you, and thinking that you don't have to change everything today or tomorrow, but you change a little bit today and tomorrow, and the day after that will be really good, or a little better, and then keep compounding that, and at the end of the year, things should be looking up a lot, because like a 37% increase will dramatically make things better, and like that's a really noticeable thing. Like that's you'll definitely tell like you're getting along better with people. You're more productive in your work. You feel more fulfilled from your work. You um, recognize good things in the world more. You can see good patterns because you're looking to make those good patterns. And most importantly, you're coming that much closer to God, your Creator. You're able to know the person that gave you this life, and you'll be able to find out why He gave it to you, what He's hoping that you will make from your life, and all that comes with that. Yeah, it's pretty amazing to think like Well, it's almost like that faith the size of a mustard seed. You know, like apparently mustard seeds are really small, but it's like he's trying to say like something super super tiny can do something so great. If all you have to do is just plant the seed and the tree will grow.
Yeah, I think that's really what we're called to do, especially even more so now in the new year. And I don't know, just with everything, whether it's politics or state that I don't know we're in um, as young Americans, that's honestly the first thing that we need to do. Like it's really easy to point fingers and kind of have grandiose ideas of what you want the world to be and what problems you see in the world. But honestly, if we could all just work on such like a tiny aspect of our life and perfect it, and then continue to build upon that, we would be so much better off. And you would see such a dramatic increase in how we live not only our own lives, but also you'd see such a dramatic increase of the world around us. Um, it's crazy. It's a decision that you have to personally make. Like, are you going to give up those 3 extra minutes of sleep? Are you going to be able to sit or stop and be with God for 30 seconds a day? Because I don't know, 30 seconds, 30 seconds of devotional time, like real devotion, not like the mechanical saying the rosary or something, but 30 seconds of a real relationship with Christ. Multiply that by 165. What is that going to look like over a year? Like, that's what's going to be crazy awesome. Like, you can put all the lukewarm hours you want into your spiritual life, but man, if you could do 30 seconds a day, that'd be incredible.
Yeah, well said, Braden. Very well said. I, I heard this quote from a movie I watched a little while ago, but in that movie, it was starring Matt Damon, and he was like, the hardest thing you ever have to do, you only need to be courageous for 20 seconds. He's like, if there's something that just scares you, like talking to somebody, the first 20 seconds are the hardest thing, but if you could be courageous for 20 seconds, you can get through it and you can make it happen. And I was just thinking about like the 30 seconds. It's like, if you just gave it that, all you had for 30 seconds, just like your life will unfold in so many ways. It's just incredible to think about. It's like, it's exciting and exhilarating, and it inspires you and will inspire others, especially when it's like a fault, like you're saying, like the one that's eating you up the most inside because you know it's bad, but you don't feel like you can overcome it. If you do, and like let's say it's something noticeable by others, and they see that you overcame it, they're like, oh, it's not set in stone. Like, this is something that's not determined forever in this person's life or my life, and I can do something similar. It's a chain reaction.
Yeah. To your point, Tom, about inspiring others, I think trying to think of how to word this, but I think part of the reason that you working on improving your habits would inspire others is that like people see you working on yourself, not looking outside at the world and what's wrong with other individuals or just the world in general. I think that yeah, by focusing on yourself, you're not sitting in judgment of anybody else, and people are inspired by that, and then in turn look to their own faults and vices. And then yeah, you mentioned the chain reaction. That's where it kind of sets off and can really multiply and take off. I don't know if any of that made sense, but that was kind of what you made me think of.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. That's well said. Yeah, like people noticing that you're just focusing on what you can control, and that inspires themselves to do similar. Well, I'm thinking that's a pretty good night for recording. Braden, did you like to leave us off on a thought you had on hope, or anything that you'd like to or feel inspired to say?
Yeah, I guess along with that idea of hope, it's just might seem hopeless to actually progress as a person in 2023. It might seem hopeless to become that better person that we were talking about, but I think there is hope in all of us if we can really focus on what we said tonight. The small things are what matters. And I'm not talking, I don't know. When I say small, I mean like actually small, but over a period of time. And when we're able to do that, we're able to actually do that well, it's going to culminate in a change in people. But honestly, it starts with the ability to actually choose that. Like, it's going to start with us three and whoever listens to this podcast, like of choosing that one thing that you're going to start giving up. It's going to start with just that very basic desire of wanting to be a better person through the smallest means. And we're going to have to, I don't know, be humble through that. And when we do that, we'll be able to further our hope and our love of God, which is the ultimate reason for all of this anyway. So also thank you for having me on. It was great.
Yeah, this is awesome. Wow, that was a great last thought there, Braden. Yeah, well, thank you all for listening. And Aiden usually says this, but be safe, be strong, be a great American, be a great Christian, and God bless you.
Mazel tov.